Maria Santos had worked as a housekeeper for the Wellington family for 3 years, moving quietly through their marble halls and gold-trimmed rooms like a shadow. At 42, she had calloused hands from years of scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets, but her spirit remained unbroken. Every day, she sent most of her modest salary back to her mother in Honduras, keeping just enough to survive in her tiny studio apartment across town. That Tuesday evening started like any other. She was polishing the crystal chandelier in the foyer when her phone buzzed with a text that made her blood freeze. Her 15-year-old daughter, Isabella, had collapsed at school and was rushed to the emergency room. The doctors suspected a burst appendix, and they needed her there immediately for consent to operate. Maria's hands trembled as she read the message again. She had no car, had never been able to afford one, and the buses had stopped running due to a transit strike that had paralyzed the city. The hospital was 25 miles away, and Isabella was alone, scared, and in excruciating pain. Every minute that passed increased the risk of her daughter's appendix rupturing completely, which could lead to life-threatening complications. She called every taxi company in the city, but none were operating during the strike. Rideshare apps showed no available drivers. Her few friends who owned cars were either at work or lived too far away to help in time. Panic began to set in as she realized that her daughter might die while she stood helpless in a mansion filled with luxury cars that could easily make the journey. The Wellingtons were attending a charity gala that evening and wouldn't return until well past midnight. Their son, Marcus Jr., was away at Harvard, and their daughter, Sophie, was studying abroad in Paris. The house was empty except for Maria, who paced frantically through rooms filled with priceless art and furniture, her mind racing with impossible solutions. As she passed through the garage, her eyes fell upon the gleaming red Ferrari 488 Spider that Mr. Wellington had purchased just last month. It sat there like a sleeping beast, its keys hanging on a gold hook nearby, a $300,000 machine that represented more money than Maria could earn in a lifetime. She had cleaned it several times, always marveling at its perfect curves and the soft leather interior that probably cost more than her yearly salary. The thought struck her like lightning. She could take the Ferrari, race to the hospital, and return before the Wellingtons came home. They would never know, and Isabella would get the medical attention she desperately needed. But even as the idea formed, Maria knew the terrible risk she was taking. Stealing from her employer could mean prison, deportation, and the end of any chance she had of providing for her family. Maria stood in the garage, her reflection multiplied in the Ferrari's pristine surface. Her daughter's pain-filled voice from their brief phone call echoed in her mind. "Mommy, please come. It hurts so much, and I'm scared." The doctors had been clear. They needed parental consent for the emergency surgery, and every minute of delay increased the danger. She thought about her life's journey that had led to this moment. Born in poverty in Tegucigalpa, Maria had crossed deserts and rivers to reach America, driven by dreams of giving her daughter opportunities she never had. For years, she had worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night, caring for elderly patients during the day, and finally landing the position with the Wellingtons, which offered the best pay and some semblance of stability. The Wellingtons had always treated her fairly, if distantly. Richard Wellington III was a tech billionaire who had revolutionized cloud computing, building his empire from a small startup in his garage. His wife, Catherine, came from old money and spent her time organizing charity events and managing their various properties. They were not cruel employers, but Maria remained invisible to them, just another service provider in their carefully orchestrated lives. Maria's hands shook as she touched the Ferrari's door handle. She had never driven anything more expensive than her friend's 10-year-old Honda Civic, and the very thought of operating such a machine terrified her. But Isabella's life hung in the balance. Her daughter was the brightest student in her class, dreaming of becoming a doctor someday. All of Maria's sacrifices had been for Isabella's future, and now that future was threatened by something as simple as distance and transportation. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. This was theft, pure and simple. If caught, she would lose her job immediately. Worse, she could face criminal charges, and as an undocumented immigrant, Any arrest could lead to deportation. She would be separated from Isabella forever, leaving her daughter alone in a country that could be as cold as it was full of opportunity. But another voice, the voice of a mother's love, whispered different truths. What good was job security if her daughter died? What meaning did legal status have if she lost the only person who gave her life purpose? Sometimes the law and morality diverged, and a parent had to choose between what was legal and what was right. Maria closed her eyes and made the decision that would change everything. She grabbed the keys from their hook, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it echoing in the spacious garage. As she slipped behind the wheel of the Ferrari, the expensive leather enveloped her like an alien embrace. The car's computer system came alive with blue lights and gentle chimes, displays showing information she couldn't understand. She whispered a prayer in Spanish, asking God to forgive her and protect both her daughter and herself in what she was about to do. With trembling fingers, she pressed the ignition button, and the Ferrari's engine roared to life. The Ferrari responded to Maria's touch like a living thing, its engine purring with barely contained power. She had watched YouTube videos about driving cars with paddle shifters during her brakes, never imagining she would need such knowledge. Now, as she carefully backed the machine out of the garage, every movement felt like she was defusing a bomb. The mansion's long driveway seemed endless as she navigated past manicured gardens and ornate fountains. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The car's advanced systems beeped and chimed around her, displaying warnings and information in languages she didn't understand. All she knew was that she had to reach the hospital before it was too late. Once on the main road, Maria pressed the accelerator gently, and the Ferrari surged forward with breathtaking acceleration. She had never experienced such power, such immediate response to her commands. The world outside blurred as she pushed the speed limit, her mind focused entirely on Isabella lying in a hospital bed, waiting for her mother to sign the papers that could save her life. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed the GPS route to Children's Memorial Hospital. 22 minutes in normal traffic, but with the transit strike, the roads were chaotic. Some areas were completely gridlocked with stranded commuters, while others were eerily empty. Maria found herself weaving through situations she had never imagined, using acceleration to merge into tiny gaps, feeling the Ferrari's advanced brakes respond instantly when traffic suddenly stopped. Halfway to the hospital, her phone rang. It was Dr. Patterson, Isabella's surgeon. "Mrs. Santos, where are you? Your daughter's condition is worsening. We really need to get her into surgery within the next 30 minutes, or we risk serious complications." "I'm coming, doctor," Maria managed, her voice tight with fear and concentration. "Please, just keep her stable. I'll be there soon." The Ferrari's navigation system rerouted her around a massive traffic jam, taking her through neighborhoods she had never seen. Past empty shopping centers and closed restaurants, through residential areas where concerned families gathered on their porches, uncertain about when normal life would resume. The car drew stares everywhere she went, a gleaming red supercar cutting through the chaos with a determination that seemed almost desperate. As she drove, Maria found herself talking to Isabella as if her daughter could hear her. "Hold on, Mija. Mommy is coming. Be strong, like you've always been. Remember when you had pneumonia when you were 8 and you fought so hard? Fight now, Isabella. I'm almost there." The hospital finally came into view, its emergency room bustling with activity despite the transportation crisis. Maria pulled into the parking garage, her hands shaking as she turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt deafening after the Ferrari's constant hum. She sat for a moment, realizing what she had just accomplished and what she had risked to do it. As she ran toward the hospital entrance, Maria didn't look back at the Ferrari. Her only thought was reaching Isabella before it was too late. The emergency room at Children's Memorial Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos. Maria burst through the automatic doors, her work uniform wrinkled from the desperate drive, her face flushed with adrenaline and fear. The receptionist looked up from her computer, taking in Maria's appearance with the practiced eye of someone who had seen countless desperate parents. "Isabella Santos," Maria gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "My daughter, she needs surgery. The doctors are waiting." Within minutes, Maria was whisked through sterile corridors to a preoperative room where Isabella lay on a gurney, her usual vibrant energy replaced by pale exhaustion. The 15-year-old's eyes brightened when she saw her mother, tears flowing freely as Maria rushed to her side. "Mommy, I was so scared you wouldn't make it," Isabella whispered, her voice weak but filled with relief. "The pain is terrible, and the doctors said they need to operate right away." Dr. Patterson appeared, a tall woman in scrubs whose calm demeanor couldn't quite hide the urgency in her eyes. "Mrs. Santos, I'm glad you're here. Isabella's appendix is severely inflamed, and we're seeing signs that it may have already begun to rupture. We need to get her into surgery immediately." As Maria signed the consent forms with shaking hands, she marveled at how different this sterile hospital environment was from the opulent mansion she had left behind. Here, surrounded by beeping machines and antiseptic smells, the only thing that mattered was her daughter's life. The Ferrari in the parking garage, the risk she had taken, the possible consequences, none of it seemed important compared to Isabella's well-being. "I love you, Mija," Maria whispered as the surgical team prepared to take Isabella away. "I'll be right here when you wake up, I promise." Isabella managed a weak smile. "Mommy, how did you get here so fast? I know the buses aren't running." Maria's heart clenched. She couldn't tell her daughter about the stolen Ferrari, couldn't burden her with that knowledge before surgery. "I found a way," she said simply. "That's what mothers do. We always find a way." As Isabella was wheeled into surgery, Maria collapsed into a waiting room chair, the full weight of her actions finally hitting her. She had committed grand theft auto, risking everything for this moment. The Ferrari sat in the parking garage like evidence of her crime, its red paint probably still warm from the desperate journey. She pulled out her phone and tried to calculate how long the surgery might take, how long before the Wellingtons might return home and discover their missing car. Dr. Patterson had said the operation could take anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, depending on complications. Even if everything went perfectly, Maria might not be able to return the Ferrari before her crime was discovered. But looking through the window into the surgical suite, where teams of medical professionals worked to save her daughter's life, Maria knew she had made the only choice possible. A mother's love demanded sacrifices that others might never understand. She had risked her freedom, her future, and her security for Isabella, and she would do it again without hesitation. As she settled in for what might be the longest wait of her life, Maria whispered another prayer, this time asking not for forgiveness, but for time, enough time for Isabella to recover and for her to somehow make things right with the Wellingtons. Richard Wellington III stood in his garage at 11:47 p.m., staring at the empty space where his Ferrari should have been. The charity gala had ended early due to concerns about the transit strike, and he had returned home to find his prized possession missing. The gold key hook hung empty, and there were no signs of forced entry, which could only mean one thing. Someone with access to his home had taken the car. Catherine Wellington emerged from the house, her evening gown rustling as she approached her husband. "Richard, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The Ferrari," he said quietly, his voice controlled despite the storm brewing beneath the surface. "It's gone." His first instinct was to call the police immediately. A $300,000 theft was no minor crime, and whoever had taken his car would face serious consequences. But something made him pause. The garage showed no signs of break-in, the security system hadn't been triggered, and nothing else appeared to be missing. This felt personal, intimate, a betrayal by someone he trusted. Wellington was not a man who had reached his position by being naive. He had built his tech empire by understanding people, by seeing patterns that others missed. As he walked through his house, checking for other signs of intrusion, his analytical mind began piecing together possibilities. The household staff was small and carefully vetted. His regular driver, James, was in the hospital recovering from surgery. The gardening crew only had access to the grounds, not the house. That left very few people with both the access and the opportunity to take the Ferrari. In his home office, Wellington pulled up the security footage from his computer. The system recorded everything except the garage interior, a privacy measure he now regretted. But the exterior cameras caught something interesting. At 7:23 p.m., his Ferrari had left the property, driven by someone whose face wasn't visible through the windshield. "Catherine," he called to his wife, who was pacing anxiously in the living room. "When did you last see Maria?" Catherine paused, thinking. "Maria? Our housekeeper? She was here when we left for the gala. She was cleaning the chandelier in the foyer." "Why would you?" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as the implication hit her. "You don't think Maria took the Ferrari?" Wellington didn't respond immediately. He was remembering conversations with Maria over the years, brief exchanges that had revealed more about her character than she probably realized. She was a woman who sent money to family in Honduras, who worked double shifts without complaint, who had once returned a $20 bill she found while cleaning, even though he wouldn't have noticed if she kept it. "It doesn't make sense," he said aloud, more to himself than to Catherine. "Maria isn't a thief. In 3 years, she's never taken so much as a paper clip." But the evidence was undeniable. The Ferrari was gone, and Maria was the most likely suspect. Wellington reached for his phone to call the police, then hesitated again. Something about this situation felt incomplete, like he was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. "Maybe we should wait until morning," Catherine suggested, reading the uncertainty in her husband's expression. "Maybe there's an explanation." Wellington shook his head. "A $300,000 car is missing, Catherine. We can't just wait and hope for an explanation." But even as he said the words, something deep in his gut told him that Maria Santos wasn't the criminal she appeared to be. At 2:15 a.m., Maria carefully navigated the Ferrari back through the empty streets toward the Wellington mansion. Isabella's surgery had been successful, the appendix removed before it could rupture completely. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully in recovery, surrounded by the best medical care money could buy, though Maria's insurance would ensure she'd be paying off the hospital bills for years to come. The drive back was different from the desperate race to the hospital. Now, exhaustion weighed heavily on Maria's shoulders, and the magnitude of what she had done pressed against her chest like a physical weight. She had committed a serious crime, and there would be consequences. The only question was whether she could return the car before the Wellingtons discovered it missing. As she turned into the mansion's long driveway, her heart sank. Every light in the house was on, and she could see figures moving behind the illuminated windows. They knew. The car was missing, and her life was about to fall apart. Maria parked the Ferrari in its exact spot in the garage, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, gathering courage for what she knew would be the most difficult conversation of her life. Through the garage's interior door, she could hear voices, Mr. Wellington's deep baritone and Mrs. Wellington's higher-pitched tones, both tense with anger and concern. She climbed out of the Ferrari and checked it carefully for any signs of damage. Miraculously, the car was exactly as she had found it, not a scratch or scuff mark from her desperate journey. She hung the keys back on their gold hook and walked toward the house, each step feeling like she was approaching her own execution. Richard Wellington was pacing in the kitchen when Maria entered through the service door. He spun around at the sound, his face cycling through surprise, relief, and confusion in rapid succession. Catherine Wellington stood by the island, her evening gown now wrinkled from hours of worried pacing. "Maria," Wellington said, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." "Yes, sir," Maria replied quietly, her eyes fixed on the marble floor. "I know. You took my Ferrari," he stated, watching her reaction carefully. "Yes, sir. I did." There was no point in denying it, no excuse that would make her actions acceptable. "I'm ready to face the consequences." Wellington studied her face, noting the exhaustion, the tear stains, the way her usually perfect uniform was wrinkled and disheveled. "Why?" he asked simply. Maria looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "My daughter was dying, sir. She needed emergency surgery, and I had no way to reach the hospital because of the transit strike. I made a choice, a wrong choice, legally, but the only choice I could make as a mother." The kitchen fell silent except for the quiet hum of expensive appliances. Catherine Wellington's expression softened slightly, while her husband's face remained unreadable. "Is she all right?" Wellington asked after a long moment. "The surgery was successful," Maria replied, surprised by the question. "She's sleeping now. The doctor said she'll make a full recovery." Wellington nodded slowly, processing this information. He had expected many explanations for the theft: financial desperation, drug addiction, simple greed, but not this. Not a mother's desperate love driving her to risk everything for her child's life. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked. "The legal consequences you're facing?" "Yes, sir," Maria whispered. "I understand completely." Richard Wellington walked to his kitchen window, gazing out at the manicured gardens that surrounded his estate. Behind him, Maria stood with quiet dignity, prepared to accept whatever punishment awaited her. Catherine watched her husband's face, trying to read the thoughts behind his carefully neutral expression. Wellington had built his fortune by making calculated decisions based on logic and market analysis. Emotion was a luxury he rarely allowed himself in business dealings. But this situation defied his usual frameworks. Here was a woman who had risked everything: her job, her freedom, her future, not for personal gain, but for love. "Maria," he said finally, turning back to face her, "in the 3 years you've worked for us, have you ever given us reason to doubt your honesty?" "No, sir," she replied softly. "Have you ever taken anything that didn't belong to you?" "No, sir. Never. Until tonight." Wellington nodded. "And if you hadn't taken the Ferrari, what would have happened to your daughter?" Maria's composure finally cracked slightly. "She might have died, sir. The doctors said every minute mattered. Her appendix was close to rupturing completely." Catherine Wellington stepped forward, her maternal instincts engaged despite the circumstances. "How old is your daughter, Maria?" 15, ma'am. She wants to be a doctor someday." "She's the smartest person I know." Wellington processed this information, his mind working through the implications and possibilities. He thought about his own children, Marcus Jr. at Harvard and Sophie studying in Paris, and tried to imagine what he would do if either of them faced a life-threatening emergency. The answer came immediately. He would move heaven and earth, break any law, challenge any authority to save them. "The Ferrari," he said after a long pause. "Any damage?"
"No, sir."
"I was very careful. I checked it completely before coming inside." "You've never driven a car like that before?"
"No, sir."
"I was terrified the whole time. But I was more terrified of losing Isabella." Wellington made a decision that surprised even himself. "Catherine, would you call Dr. Patterson at Children's Memorial? I want a full report on Isabella's condition and prognosis." Both women stared at him in confusion. Catherine recovered first. "Of course, but Richard, why?" "Just make the call, please." As Catherine retreated to another room to make the phone call, Wellington continued studying Maria's face. He saw exhaustion, fear, and resignation, but also something else: the absolute certainty of someone who had acted according to her deepest values, regardless of the consequences. "Maria, do you know why I'm successful?" he asked. She shook her head, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I'm successful because I can recognize character. I can see past actions to motivations. I can distinguish between someone who steals from greed and someone who takes what they need to save a life." He paused, letting his words sink in. "What you did tonight was technically theft, but it was also one of the most morally courageous acts I've ever witnessed." Maria stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. This wasn't the response she had expected. She had prepared herself for police, for arrest, for deportation, not for what sounded almost like praise. "Sir, I don't understand," she whispered. Wellington smiled for the first time since discovering the missing Ferrari. "Maria, you're about to learn something about the difference between being wealthy and being rich. Wealth is about money. Being rich is about understanding what truly matters in life." Catherine Wellington returned from her phone conversation with Dr. Patterson, her expression thoughtful. "Isabella is doing very well," she reported. "The surgery was completely successful, and she should be able to go home in 2 days." Dr. Patterson said that if the surgery had been delayed much longer, there could have been serious complications. Wellington nodded, his decision crystallizing. Maria, sit down. Please. Maria hesitated and used to being invited to sit in the Wellington's kitchen. She perched carefully on the edge of a bar stool, her hands folded tightly in her lap. 3 years ago, when we hired you, our previous housekeeper had stolen jewelry from Catherine's collection, Wellington began. We installed additional security systems, conducted more thorough background checks, and honestly, we were prepared to distrust any new employee. But you proved yourself different. You returned money you found while cleaning. You worked overtime without asking for extra pay when we had dinner parties. You treated our home with more respect than some of our guests do. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Tonight, you faced an impossible choice. You could follow the law and potentially lose your daughter, or break the law and save her life. You chose love over legality. As a father, I can't fault that decision. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Sir, I'm so sorry. I know it was wrong, and I'm prepared to face. Wellington held up a hand, stopping her. Maria, I'm not pressing charges. The words hung in the air like a miracle Maria couldn't quite believe. Catherine smiled, nodding her agreement with her husband's decision. But more than that, Wellington continued, I'm going to help you. Isabella deserves a mother who doesn't have to choose between her child's life and following the law. She deserves opportunities that match her intelligence and ambition. He walked to his desk and returned with his laptop. I've been thinking about our family's foundation. We've donated millions to various causes, but we've never invested in individual stories, in people who demonstrate the kind of character you showed tonight. His fingers moved across the keyboard. I'm setting up a college scholarship fund for Isabella. Full tuition, room, and board at whatever university she chooses, including medical school, if that's still her dream. Maria gasped, unable to process what she was hearing. Sir, I can't accept. You're not accepting it, Wellington interrupted. Isabella is earning it. A girl who inspires her mother to risk everything for her life is exactly the kind of person who will use education to make the world better. Catherine stepped forward. And Maria, we're giving you a raise. A substantial one. And we're helping you get your immigration status resolved through our family's legal team. No one should have to live in fear while working as hard as you do. Wellington closed the laptop and looked directly at Maria. But I need you to promise me something. Anything, sir. Next time you face an emergency, any emergency, you call me first. My phone is always on, and my resources are always available to help people who matter to this family. And Maria? He smiled warmly. You and Isabella matter to this family. Maria broke down completely then, years of fear and struggle and desperate hope pouring out in tears of relief and gratitude. She had prepared herself for the worst night of her life and instead found herself experiencing unexpected kindness from people she had only seen as employers. Why, she managed to ask through her tears. Why are you being so generous? Wellington considered the question seriously. Because character recognizes character, Maria. And because sometimes the most important thing wealth can do is support the courage of people who have much less money but much more heart. 6 months later, Isabella Santos stood at the podium of her high school auditorium, delivering the valedictorian speech to a packed audience. In the front row, Maria sat next to Richard and Catherine Wellington, her face glowing with pride as her daughter spoke eloquently about perseverance, opportunity, and the power of unexpected kindness. My mother taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, Isabella said, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the auditorium. Courage is acting with love even when you're. Maria stared at him. Are you offering me a job in Baltimore? I'm offering you a career in Baltimore, he corrected. Someone has to keep an eye on our investment in Isabella's future. And besides, after 5 years, you're not just our employee, Maria. You're family. As they walked through the hospital corridors together, Isabella in her surgical scrubs, Maria in her professional attire, and Richard in his tailored suit, they looked like an unlikely family, which, in many ways, they were. Bound not by blood but by a single night when desperation met compassion, when crime met understanding, and when fear met love. You know, Richard said as they reached the hospital parking garage, where a newer Ferrari sat gleaming in the afternoon sun. I never did thank you properly for that night, Maria. Thank me? She asked, confused. Mr. Wellington, Richard, I stole your car. No, he said with a gentle smile. You showed me what unconditional love looks like. You taught me the difference between having wealth and being truly rich. And you brought our family a daughter we never knew we needed. Isabella laughed, the sound echoing through the parking garage. Should I be worried that you still think about that night, Mr. Wellington? I think about it every day, he admitted, because it was the night I learned that the most valuable things in life, courage, integrity, love, family, can't be bought. They can only be earned, recognized, and cherished. As they drove home together in the Ferrari that had once been the instrument of desperate theft and had become a symbol of second chances, Maria reflected on the unexpected turns life could take. One terrifying decision made in love had led to blessings she never could have imagined. Sometimes, the most profound changes in life come not from careful planning but from moments when we choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. Sometimes, what looks like theft from the outside is actually the most generous gift of all, the gift of showing others who they really are and who they have the capacity to become. The Ferrari carried them home through streets that had once seemed impossible to navigate, its engine humming a quiet song of journeys completed and new adventures yet to begin.